A very good evening to one and all who have joined us today. Our honorable guest, Shri Tushar Mehta, Solicitor General of India, Professor Dr. Raman Mittal, Professor in charge of Campus Law Center, Dr. Seema Singh, Faculty Convener of Debate and Discussion Society, respected faculty members, guests, students, and all the viewers and audience. A very warm welcome to the valedictory session of Courtroom Legends keynote series. Leading up to this valedictory session, over the past 1 month, the series saw luminaries of the legal world who not only shared their unprecedented courtroom experiences, but also enlightened us with their unparalleled knowledge. And today, as we culminate our journey, we are honored to have the Solicitor General of India, Mr. Tushar Mehta, speaking on one of the most pertinent topics of our time, demystifying the freedom of speech and expression. On behalf of Campus Law Center and Debate and Discussion Society, I, Kajal Sonkar, student convener of Debate Society, thank Mr. Tushar Mehta for gracing us with his esteemed presence. Now, I would like to request our professor in charge and academician par excellence, Professor Dr. Raman Mittal, to please address us with his welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, Kajal. The most respected senior advocate, Shri Tushar Mehta ji, the Solicitor General of India, my colleagues at Campus Law Center, and dear students. We have gathered this evening to listen to one of the most illustrious lawyers of our times on a topic of paramount importance, demystifying the freedom of speech and expression. Really, who could be a better and more learned person than senior advocate Mr. Tushar Mehta to enlighten us on this very interesting topic? I would like to start my welcome remarks with a small story. Once it so happened that in a forest, a tigress died while giving birth to a cub. The cub would have died in all probability. However, as chance would have it, a herd of goats was passing by, and they took pity at the cub and adopted him. As the tiger cub was brought up by goats, he believed himself to be a goat too. It was simple, natural. Brought up by the goats, living with the goats, he believed he was a goat. He remained a vegetarian, eating and chewing grass. He was always bleating like goats. His expression was like mah, 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 the bleat of a goat. He had no conception, not even in his dreams could he dream that he was a tiger, and he was a tiger. Then one day, it happened that an old tiger came across this herd of goats, and that old tiger could not believe his eyes. A young tiger was walking amidst the goats. Neither were the goats afraid of the tiger, nor were they aware that the tiger was walking amongst them. The tiger was also walking like a goat. The old tiger somehow got hold of the young tiger because it was difficult to catch hold of him. He escaped, he tried, he cried, he screamed. He was afraid. He was shivering with fear. All the goats escaped, and he was also trying his best to escape with them. But the old tiger got hold of him and pulled him towards the lake. He would not go. He resisted, but the old tiger wouldn't allow him to escape. The old tiger still pulled him and took him to the lake. At dusk time, the lake was silent and clear like a mirror. He forced the young tiger to look into the water. He saw with tearful eyes. The vision was clear in the calmness of the lake, that he looked just like the old tiger. Tears disappeared, and a new sense of being arose. The goat started disappearing from his mind. He was no more a goat, but he could not believe his own enlightenment. Still, the body was shivering a little. He was afraid. He was thinking, maybe I'm imagining, I'm dreaming. How can a goat turn so suddenly into a tiger? It is not possible. It has never happened before. It never happens that way, he thought. He couldn't believe his own eyes. But now, the first spark, the first ray of light had entered into his being. He was no more the same, really. He could never be the same again. Seeing the young tiger gaining confidence, the old tiger roared. The vibration of the roar filled the earth and the sky. The young and the new tiger, he too felt that resonance, and a roar burst through his being in response. With his first roar, the goat disappeared in that roar, and the tiger was there in its beauty, splendor, in all its glamour, entitled to his own calling. He had finally come home. My dear young friends, we are all entitled to this roar. This roar is the speech and expression, the freedom of which is guaranteed by our Constitution. As the silent lake and the calm waters of the lake were needed for the young tiger to realize who he really was, the mirror of the Constitution is that way necessitated. It is the mirror that makes us realize who we are, what are our rights, and more importantly, what are our duties. Friends, we are extremely grateful to Mr. Tushar Mehta for agreeing to address us on this very important topic. Thank you so much, and we welcome you, sir, most heartily. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raman sir, for that captivating story. On this note, I would like to introduce our guest of honor. It is my privilege to be introducing Mr. Tushar Mehta, Solicitor General of India, who is not just the defender of the government, but also one of the highest line of defense for all the constitutional bodies of our country. Mr. Mehta, in his illustrious career as Solicitor General of India and Additional Solicitor General of India, represented Union of India in various cases of national and international importance, like that of Rohingya deportation case, Rafael case, Tehseen Poonawalla, Tushar Gandhi, Putta Swamy, Assam's NRC. Mr. Mehta also represented State of Gujarat as Advocate General in numerous matters, State of Jammu and Kashmir in Article 35A matter, State of Uttar Pradesh in Ayodhya title suit. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome the courtroom legend himself, Mr. Tushar Mehta. I yield the floor to you, sir.
Professor Mittal, Seema Singh ji, Kajal, and all my friends who are listening to me, perhaps sacrificing their Saturday evening. Good evening to all of you. Friends, the topic for the day is not only an interesting topic, but it has always been a very controversial topic. Irrespective of the era in which this topic is being discussed, this topic had its own pitfalls, its own reactions, and views and counter views. As back as in early 40s, Winston Churchill said that what is freedom of speech? If I say something, it is my freedom of speech. But if someone responds, it's an outrage. The real answer lies somewhere in between these two extremes. Before even attempting to demystify what is freedom of speech and expression and how the law has evolved in our country, there would be two views possible, as it is possible in every subject, on every issue, on every ideology. One would be a conservative view, and another would be a more advanced, a more nuanced view. The truth lies somewhere in between. If I were to summarize what is freedom of speech, which is, of course, a very sacred and sacrosanct fundamental right of every citizen, every human being, I would say that my right to move my fist ends when your nose begins. This is the true test of knowing what is the freedom of speech and expression. Before we discuss any aspect of freedom of speech and expression, please bear one fact in mind. Your freedom of speech is a hate speech for someone else. It can be a hate speech for someone else. If we know this distinction, then we have understood this complex subject of freedom of speech and expression. We as citizens, not just as lawyers, must always remember that despite this age-old rhetoric that speech has its consequences, we must remember that the consequences vary depending upon the degree to which it is propagated, but consequences exist nonetheless. I am not for a second trying to minimize the width of freedom of speech and expression, but I would like to start this discussion with this caveat, which is absolutely necessary, especially in the present circumstances and the present period of history the world is passing through. We are in the era of internet. Not a very good example to give, but the infamous Mike Tyson, the American boxing star, very recently remarked on a social media, and people who are very active in social media, he said, people are way too comfortable with disrespecting people, not getting punched in the face for it. This is one extreme. Getting punched in the face may be and is an extreme response which suits only a boxer and not to citizens who love their freedom, who love the liberty, who love to live by the constitutional principles. This contest between freedom of speech and expression and to what extent you can move your punch and know that my nose has started beginning, when to stop. That contest is sought to be remedied by the Constitution, by our constitutional framers, the fathers of our Constitution. They have done a brilliantly amazing job. They have respected, retained, and protected freedom of speech as one of the most sacred and sacrosanct right, fundamental right, and have also earmarked the boundaries which we should not be crossing while exercising this right. Friends, judiciary has also from time to time given new dimensions to this fundamental right of free speech and expression. The speech earlier was a different form and format of speech, which has now evolved to the freedom of speech and expression in an unknown medium, an anonymous medium, namely the internet. I'm saying something. I'm sitting thousands and thousands of kilometers away from you. I have a potential to convey my thoughts. I have a potential to hurt your feelings. I have a potential to insult you. I have a potential to keep myself anonymous by creating a fake account. The judiciary has attempted to keep pace with these changing times where the mode, manner, method, and format of speech and expression has evolved. We usually say that the court breathed life into the provisions of law, and this is more true about the Constitution of India. It will not be an exaggeration, friends, to say that after the right to life and personal liberty, Article 19(1)(a), which guarantees to every citizen the freedom of speech and expression, has been one of the most important branches of fundamental rights. I would attempt to give you a very broad outline as to how in last 7 decades our judiciary has evolved the freedom of speech and expression doctrine. And fortunately for the citizens of this country, the judiciary has always expanded the scope, ambit, and width of this sacred right. If you examine the judicial journey, the evolution of law, the first phase started with the commencement of the Constitution of India, which was the period of emergence of freedom of press. The press does not necessarily include only the newspapers. The press here would include even the books, the publication of books. We cannot go into the question of various judgments in detail, but there are cases where people were killed for expressing their opinion and killed in accordance with law. I'm not talking of killing by other individuals who were offended. There are judgments in a magazine called Crossroad, which was a communist publication, an organizer, which was an RSS publication, both opposing ideologies of each other and coming from different and distinct parts of the country, but they laid similar claiming right to freedom of speech and expression, and the judiciary protected them. I just briefly point out what it was. A weekly English journal called Crossroads was printed and published in Bombay by one Mr. Ramesh Thapar. Incidentally, Mr. Thapar is the brother of the noted historian Romila Thapar. He was known to be a Marxist ideologue, and the magazine published articles which were critical of policies of the then Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Nehru, especially his policies on external affairs, his foreign policy. At the time, a communist movement was gaining steam in the western part of Madras state, which is now the state of Kerala. The government of the day feared that the Crossroads may ignite the communist ideology, and therefore the government exercised its powers under section 9(1)(a), 9 within bracket 1 capital A, of the Madras Maintenance of Public Order 1949, and issued an order, a statutory order, imposing a ban on the circulation of Crossroads somewhere in March 1950. Now take another case. One more magazine, Organizer, which had one Sri Brij Bhushan as its publisher. The editor was Mr. K.R. Halkani. He was served with a notice somewhere again in March 1950 under section 7, subsection 1, subsection C of the East Punjab Public Safety Act. Both laid the challenge on the ground that this action of the then government of the day violates our constitutional freedom of free speech and free expression. The Honorable Supreme Court decided both the cases with a majority of 5 versus 1, against the government. The evolution of law of fundamental rights necessarily, by its very nature, contains judgment where the government lost. The importance is not that the government lost. The importance is not that the government lost almost always. The importance is the citizen won before the highest court of the country. And it is the citizen who is winning till date whenever there is an encroachment on his fundamental rights. In the two cases which I refer to, the majority judgment was delivered by Justice Patanjali Shastri, one of the first judges who were appointed in immediately after the independence when the Supreme Court was formed. The only dissenting judge was Justice Fazal Ali. The majority categorically held that the law restricting freedom of speech and expression is directed solely against undermining of the security of the state, and such law cannot fall within the reservation under Article 19.2. So, friends, all of us know that Article 19.1a provides for fundamental right to free speech and expression, and Article 19 subarticle 2 provides the limitations on that freedom. It must be remembered here, when the Supreme Court decided this question by majority 5-1, Article 19 subarticle 2 existed in its older form prior to the amendment. Despite that, the Supreme Court protected, preserved, and ensured that the sanctity of this right is not jeopardized by any executive government. What happened thereafter? The now understood inevitable. Sometimes, friends, we learn from history, and if we go back in point of time, we really feel that it was an inevitable consequences during those periods, and that has happened with the Constitution on several occasions. But the aftermath of this judgment was the government bringing the constitutional amendment in June 1951. The government, by way of a constitutional amendment, included 3 new reasonable restrictions, comma within comma. There were 3 more restrictions added to the right to free speech and expression. And those 3 were public order, friendly relations with foreign states, and incitement to an offense. Very interestingly, it is said that the then government, after sudden demise of the then Chief Justice of India, Justice Kania, opposed the appointment of Justice Patanjali Shastri as the next CJI. Please remember, when the Constitution was framed, when the Supreme Court came into existence, our first Chief Justice of India was Justice Kania. Justice Patanjali Shastri was number 2, and he was to succeed as Chief Justice of India, Justice Kania, who died suddenly. The government of the day, it is perceived, and my personal belief is rightly perceived, opposed the appointment of Justice Patanjali Shastri because of this judgment, which was pro-citizen judgment. The silver line, even after that experience, and as I would show, and as many judgments have shown this nation, is that such executive interference by way of constitutional amendment seeking to either nullify or dilute the zeal of the Constitutional Court to protect fundamental rights of its citizens have not deterred the Supreme Court of India in its journey, and it has continued to protect the fundamental rights despite such interruptions. Ever since the amendment of this constitution, which I refer to, the Supreme Court has continued to interpret the restrictions which were brought in by the legislature at the behest of the government of the day in the most restrictive manner, very strictly, leaning in favor of protecting, preserving, and recognizing the fundamental right of citizens. The Supreme Court did not interfere with the insertion of few reasonable restrictions. If we forget the two instances which brought about the constitutional amendment, maybe the amendments might be required for some other purposes, may not be required for the purposes for which the amendments were brought in. The next case, therefore, comes is Express Newspaper Private Limited. That happened in 1958, where again the government of the day tried to curb the freedom of speech and expression of a newspaper which is running even till date, that is Indian Express. I don't wish to elaborate on that judgment any further, but the next judgment, which is a judgment of significance in line, is that of Sakal Papers. It was a judgment decided somewhere in the beginning of early 60s, 1962. The judgment is AIR 1962, Supreme Court, page 305. And it strengthened the Supreme Court's earlier view that freedom of expression is not just verbal expression or written expression, either in form of a speech or in form of a writing, but even picketing and demonstration is also a part of Article 19(1)(a). That was Kameshwar Singh versus State of Bihar. Again, 1962, Supreme Court. The history remembers the period between 1970 to 1980, essentially for a bad reason, and that is the period of emergency and the political turbulence. The most fundamental attack, most brazen attack on freedom of speech and expression over and above several other fundamental rights took place during this period of emergency. And we all should be very happy to know that it was again this great institution, namely the Supreme Court of India, which stepped in between the brazen attempts of the government of the day, taking away the fundamental rights on one side, and the citizens of India seeking to protect their fundamental rights on the other. Supreme Court in 1972, just before the emergency, but when the emergency period was in the offing, I must add, decided Bennett, Coleman and Company versus Union of India, which was publishing Times of India, and the freedom of press was further extended by the Supreme Court to include not only the freedom of the medium, namely the newspaper, but the freedom of the readers to read and be informed. This is a historical landmark in the history of evolution of this law. Till 1972, the freedom of speech and expression was being looked upon from the prism of someone who is propagating his right. I want to speak something. I want to write something. I want to express something. Do I have a right or not? For the first time, the Supreme Court said, forget your right to speak, your right to print, your right to distribute your views. The recipient has a right to read. The recipient has a right to be informed. This happened in Bennett Coleman and Company, in case of Times of India. This phase thereafter did not see much of the expansion of freedom of speech and expression. But the next phase, in which maximum number of cases were decided, again by the Supreme Court, and now based upon the new jurisprudence of right to know and right to be informed, is right to silence in Bijoy Amuel versus State of Kerala. Friends, for the first time, possibly for the first time in the history of judiciary, the freedom of speech and expression was examined from a different perspective. Right to remain silent had always been a fundamental right under Article 20. I have a right to keep my mouth shut. If I don't wish to speak, nobody can compel me to speak. But Article 20 restricted itself to the investigation. I cannot be compelled to be a witness against myself. But this judgment extended that right further and included a negative right in Article 19(1)(a) by saying that right to free speech includes right not to speak. Thereafter, the freedom of speech and expression saw a different twist in case of Bengal Cricket Association. Again, the Honorable Supreme Court stepped in and said that it's not just the broadcaster who has a right to propagate his broadcast. We are not concerned with the right of a broadcaster. He does have the right. His right is protected. But we are more concerned about the right of viewers. It was a case involving telecasting a live match. I'm not going into the facts of the case, but one yet another landmark in the journey of the Supreme Court's evolution of law on the subject, where the Supreme Court said that it is not only your right to propagate, your right to broadcast what you wish to broadcast, of course subject to the reasonable restrictions, but we protect the right of viewers to see, viewers to participate, viewers to know, and viewers to be informed under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India. The last judgment on this subject, which according to me is a landmark judgment, is that of Shreya Sindhu. I had a good fortune of appearing before the Honorable Supreme Court in this matter, representing the Government of India. The present government had just taken over in 2014 May. Few months prior to that, the Information Technology Act was amended. And the amendment resulted into certain restrictions on the right of internet users of various platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc., because there are a large number of hundreds and thousands of them. So these are the names which I am giving are only illustrative, but there were certain restrictions, and it was for me to defend. The Supreme Court conducted a very reasonable review and introduced very high limitations on the power of the state, even if when the power is exercised by the state in under Article 19(2), it can never be questioned that the state, namely the legislature, the parliament, did not have the legislative competence. But the Supreme Court read Article 14, Article 19(1)(a), that is freedom of speech and expression, and Article 21, and followed Maneka Gandhi judgment. This judgment, authored by none other than the luminary Justice Rohinton Nariman, declared this particular provision, namely Section 66A of the Information Technology Act, to be violative of Constitution of India. Today, internet, digital medium, social media platforms, they're very powerful. They are very effective means of communication. They can form an opinion. They can generate an opinion. Right, wrong, in the interest of the humanity, against the interest of the humanity, for the betterment of the humankind, whichever way, it has a tremendous potential of generating light as well as heat. It is this potent medium and the power it wields, especially in the minds of the vulnerable younger ones, that it has attracted the attention of jurists worldwide. What are the contours, what are the parameters, if at all, of seeking to control this medium for larger good, for the good of the human being, for the good of the human race, for the good of the society? Friends, this is a very sensitive means of communication. The dissemination of news and views can reach within no time inside and outside the country in seconds. Nobody is there to vouch for the authenticity of what is being conveyed. In earlier times, if a newspaper publishes a story, there was a sense of responsibility. You can fasten the responsibility for the consequences if consequences do follow. Now, this is an anonymous medium. You can transmit, you can communicate your views, your ideas. The news according to which there can be riots, there can be peace, there can be serious consequences to humankind. But the jurists are still struggling. First, whether this right should be controlled at all, and if yes, by what means, so as to ensure that my fundamental right as a citizen of this country, your fundamental right as a citizen of this country, is not put to any jeopardy. Democratic process requires a deeper understanding of the impact of these means of communication, and that is a worrying factor. Now we have already surpassed the age of printed newspapers, and we have surpassed the age of even broadcasters, the traditional, conventional broadcasters. We are in the era of digital platforms. It has huge impact, not only on the individuals, but on the society as a whole. People come to conclusions, people take actions, people react rather than respond based upon what is available on these digital platforms. It's a very vast expanse. It has powerful means. It's a potent medium. It can propagate a peace message as fast as it can propagate a hate message resulting into serious consequences on public order. Something needs to be done by all, something will have to be done by all, but everything would be with two conditions. A, it will have to be done strictly in accordance with the Constitution of India, and it cannot be done in violation of our fundamental rights of free speech and expression. Friends, there is not even a remote possibility that this medium can ever be controlled, and our freedom of speech and expression would virtually remain untouched. That makes our task more responsible. It is now for us, those who are using the platforms, the digital platforms, to realize on our own what is the width of my right to move my fist so that I can stop when somebody else's nose begins. Philosophically, the comparative constitutional debate on freedom of speech and expression can be divided in two broad compartments, but I'm not a very good fan of Western jurisprudence. There are Indian case law, Babulal Parathe, Madhu Limie, Shreya Singhal, etc., etc. And Supreme Court of India has analyzed the freedom of speech and expression in the Indian context. On a normative plane, the realists amongst us would justify restrictions on free exercise of speech and expression. And those who are on the other extreme would scorn at any restrictions whatsoever. However, very curiously, almost throughout the world, the de facto situation is different. There seems to be an increasing movement to label aspects of expression of individuals or groups as hate speech. There is a movement going on. The jurisprudence is evolving, and our jurisprudence will have to evolve with the changing times, balancing between individuals' right to free speech and expression against society's right to live in an orderly world. In the present situation and in this limited application, I believe there must exist a genuine fear of a lopsided hate speech regime shielding only some groups, because ultimately your freedom of speech would be a hate speech for me or not necessarily depend upon my level of tolerance. Your exercise of your fundamental right may be perceived by me as a hate speech, but not by some other individual who is listening to the very same speech. The answer all of us will have to find for ourselves is, can the reasonable restrictions ever be dependent upon the level of tolerance of an individual or a group of individuals? If the expression is to be curtailed in the first place, if at all it needs to be and it can be, should it not be equally applicable to all communities, all groups, all ideologies across the globe? If the hate speech curtailment is to sustain, it cannot ignore other forms of hate speech, which is currently, in my personal view, masquerading as mainstream content. Therefore, if we need to define and demarcate free speech and hate speech, the regulation, if at all, shall have to be keeping in mind the national security, national integrity, religious sensitivity of others, societal values. It cannot become tolerance centric. You cannot punish the tolerant by rewarding intolerant. That is the bottom line of my discourse today. If you wish to confer freedom of speech unrestricted, let it be for all, irrespective of the level of tolerance of the listener, of the viewer. If you do not do that, if you base this religious sensibilities, society sensibilities, other tendencies, etc., depending upon the level of tolerance, you necessarily end up punishing the tolerant at the cost of and rewarding the intolerant. This would be what Supreme Court says is manifestly arbitrary. Friends, I would end my discourse with very legendary findings recorded in Maneka Gandhi by none other than Justice P.N. Bhagwati. In para 20, he says, and I'll read the relevant part. It may be recalled that the test formulated in R.C. Cooper case merely refers to direct operation or direct consequence and effect of the state action on the fundamental right of the petitioner and does not use the word inevitable in this connection. But there can be no doubt on a reading of the relevant observations of Justice Shah, his brother judge, that such was the test really intended to be laid down by the court in that case. The relevant part now, in my view, now, if the effect of state action on the fundamental right is direct and inevitable, then a fortiori, it must be presumed to have been intended by the authority taking the action, and hence this doctrine of direct and inevitable effect has been described by some jurists as the doctrine of intended and real effect. Whatever we do with Article 19(1)(a), be it exercise of it right or be it curtailment of it under Article 19(2), must be guided by the historical words of Justice Bhagwati. Friends, all of us are passing through a very tiring, turbulent, and trying times. The humanity, in literal sense of the term, is fighting for its existence. It's an existential crisis. I cannot thank all of you enough for having spared this Saturday evening, even during these trying times. I thank everyone. I wish everyone a very good evening, and please be safe. Please follow all guidelines issued by the government and keep your family members safe too. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, sir. That was an empowering keynote, sir. Your academic eloquence complements rightly your courtroom prowess. We feel we are highly privileged to get this opportunity to listen to you, and we cannot thank you enough for taking time out for us. Sir, I am Vijay Pujari, a final year student of Campus Law Center, presently serving as the convener of the Debate and Discussion Society, and I feel deeply honored to moderate this Q&A session. I wish to begin this session with your due permission, sir. The Q&A
Yes,
session.
please.
Yes. So the first question, sir. Judiciary is the fundamental to India's constitutional democracy. Advocates are integral and irrevocable part of Indian judiciary. How do we deal with those advocates who erode public confidence and defame the might of Supreme Court, sir, as we have lately been seeing this?
Unfortunately, Vijay, your question is very pertinent, very timely, and very contemporary. We have amongst us those who, rather than bringing the Supreme Court's correct image as a protector of fundamental rights, try to malign the Supreme Court. The only answer which I can think of to deal with such elements is by ignoring them. And of course, bringing it to the notice of one and all that whenever the executive has sought to or attempted to take away your fundamental right, it was only this institution which has protected your fundamental rights. Whatever some people may say, some elements, there would be some dissatisfied souls in every system. Our system also had, but ignore them. Still, people of India have tremendous faith in this institution, despite some minority group, some minority in sense of numerical minority group, propagating otherwise.
Thank you, sir. So the second question, sir, have we been honest in our application of restrictions under 19.2 with respect to the menace of social and digital media, sir?
As I covered in the last part of my discourse, we have been honest in the sense that both the legislature and the executive is alive to this situation. So is judiciary. They know the potent medium. They know the power of this medium, power to do good as well as power to do something nasty. So yes, we have been honest, but we have not been able to find out a solution which can balance the individual rights vis-a-vis rights of the society, of an orderly society. So that process is going on, the evolution is going on. Some way would be found without curbing anybody's freedom. Maybe some responsibility, some liability can be there.
So I have a personal question before we open up to the floor, sir.
Please.
Sir, how do you manage your time as the Solicitor General of India, sir, and how is your personal private practice different from your job as Solicitor General of India? I'm told that you're one of the most working senior out there in the Supreme Court. So how do you pull it off, sir?
See, I'm always reminded of words of Dhirubhai Ambani. He used to say, I've read it somewhere, that if somebody says that I'm working for any lawyer or any professional or any businessman, working for say 16 hours a day, either he's a liar or he's not a good time manager. I think if our Prime Minister is working for 16 hours a day, 18 hours a day at times, and I know it for sure personally, then we have no right to complain that we don't get time. But I do get time for my family. I do find time with my family, and by God's grace, it is managed.
Thank you, sir. With that, we open it up, sir. We have Adarsh Kumar coming in with the question, sir.
As you said, social media is a very powerful means of freedom of speech, of expression, especially for those who can't raise their voice in the conventional manner. And on the other hand, the misuse of social media demands the need for formal censorship, but it comes with the fears of violation of civil rights of people as an inevitable consequence. So in light of this, sir, how can we create a balance between ensuring that freedom of speech and expression is available, as well as we prevent its misuse?
First of all, others, let us be clear, whether formal or informal, there can never be censorship. Number one. Number two, it can never be stopped, prohibited, or curtailed. It can only be regulated. The right can be regulated for the reasons given under Article 19.2. How to do it is a big question, and everyone is trying to find an answer to that.
Thank you, sir. So we have Farooq Saifi coming with the next question. Farooq.
Justice Sharad Bobde said Advocate General considered a part of a government. What Advocate General thinks is what government thinks. So, sir, how much do you agree with these words and how do you see this remark?
See, most of the remarks which you read are generally taken out of the context. If you attend, whenever you will attend the court, you will realize that there are so many discussions, debates going on. Something is said. I was not there, but I don't think Justice Bobde, or for that matter, any honorable judge, ever meant what is portrayed in the media.
Yes, sir. So we have Shubhangi Jha coming with the next question. Shubhangi.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening, Shubhangi.
Sir, I had a question. Can an offending action, be it caricature, cartoon, or a speech, which is not intended or have tendency to create disorder or disturbance to public peace, be a ground for restriction on freedom of speech and expression?
Cannot be. Cannot be. That is why if you have carefully heard my speech and would have heard between the lines, because there are so many things spoken without speaking, I say that whenever you protect my freedom of speech and expression, Shubhangi may feel offended. Vijay may not feel offended. So what is the test? Test of an intolerant viewer or a listener, or a test of a tolerant viewer or listener? But law on this is fairly well settled and is being settled by the Supreme Court. It is evolving every day in favor of, leaning in favor of the protection of free speech.
Thank you, sir. We have Toshita Joshi with the next question. Toshita.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Toshita.
So, my question is that it's being alleged that the charge of sedition is being used as a ground to restrict freedom of speech and expression. So, how can a balance be created between curbing seditious activities and protection of speech and expression at the same time?
See, whenever the sedition law is used, which has a direct nexus with Article 19(1)(a), right? Correct, that is freedom of speech and expression, the Constitutional Court has protected it. So far, I have not come across a case where a sedition law is applied, which has a direct bearing on Article 19(1)(a) right of the citizen, and the Constitutional Court has not come to the rescue. It is a balance between the two, and that fine balance is maintained generally by the executive and always by the judiciary.
Thank you, sir. Farah Rahman is coming with next questions. Farah.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening, Farah.
Sir, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that we often see media cross the line of freedom of press and enter into the realm of media trial. Though several guidelines and checks are purportedly in place, none of them seem to effectively curtail this practice. So, what, according to you, are the appropriate measures that can be taken in this regard? Thank you.
See, Farah, your question is very pertinent. And I would say only this, that whatever we want to see the media shows us, if we don't enjoy seeing such things, they would not show us such things. Number one. Number two, now guidelines are in place. You cannot have a media trial. But at the same time, there cannot be, in a free country like ours, in a free democracy like ours, which is governed by the rule of law, by the constitutional principles, there cannot be any curb on what a particular media or medium is showing, so long as it is not crossing the permissible boundaries drawn by the Constitution.
Thank you, sir. We have one last public question, sir. Kajal is coming up with. Kajal Sonkar, sir. Kajal, please go ahead.
Yes, Kajal.
Yes. So my question is with regards to Article 19(2). It says that, so one of the heads on which freedom of media can be restricted is on basis of decency and morality. And we have seen a lot of times that the definition for obscenity, indecency, and morality is not very clear in our law. So how do you think as a nation we should deal with such a lacuna?
See, I'm forgetting the name of the honorable judge, but a very remarkable historical judge from Britain who said about obscenity, and this was precisely the question before him, that how do you define obscenity? He says, I know it when I see it. There cannot be any definition of decency, number one. Number two, your question that this is media curtailment, curtailment of media freedom. 19(1)(a) and 19(2) is not just media. Anything which is obscene can be a subject matter of restriction, restricting 19(1)(a). And it is not only impossible, it is undesirable to even attempt to define in a straitjacket what the term obscenity means. It should not be defined. It's undesirable to define. On a case-to-case basis, when the matter goes before the court knows that yes, this is not obscene or this is obscene. This is within permissible limits. This is not.
Thank you, sir. One last question from all the fellow third-year students, sir.
Yeah, please.
We all want your word of wisdom, sir, as we are passing out in a couple of months from Campus Law Center. Any suggestions from you, sir?
I'll only give one word, which I also followed, and you also follow as a law student and subsequently as a lawyer. Nobody is wise enough to whom you should ask for any words of wisdom. The wisdom will come to you the moment you face the life. Nobody is wise enough to tell you anything. Just face the world, the wisdom will come automatically.
Thank you so much, sir. We can't thank you enough for taking time.
No, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure with all of you, all young minds.
Yes. Yes, I request a guiding light of Debate and Discussion Society, Dr. Seema Singh, for closing remarks and vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Mehta sir. It is my proud privilege to propose this vote of thanks in this validated session of Courtroom Legend. And sir, we have traveled a complete journey of evolution of right to freedom of speech and expression in India, evolved by Honorable Supreme Court along with you in this insightful keynote address. Some important takeaway points of this very relevant topic I would definitely like to mention, sir, because this is a very relevant and a very important topic, and this is continuously into discussion. So few points as per my understanding which are very relevant. They are: every right comes with certain responsibilities. This is a right which equally affects the right of listeners or the receiver of the information. So their level of tolerance should be equally considered. Freedom of speech and expression has its own jurisprudence. It is one of the most fundamental rights which can never be enjoyed effectively without certain regulations in national and social interest. Right to receive correct information is also a fundamental right. More challenges we are going to face in the form of fake news and hate speeches in this era of fourth generation information and technology revolution. It is a right whose negative use may cause massive damage to humanity and to the country. So this right should be exercised with utmost care and utmost responsibility. Even in the preamble of our constitution, sovereignty comes first, followed by liberty of thoughts and expression. So, sir, with this, I thank you. I don't have enough words to extend my thanks to provide us your valuable time for the keynote address. This was the last lecture of this Courtroom Legend series, and we are truly very honored and very blessed that we got your time, because your schedule always remains very tight. And with this, sir, on the behalf of entire Campus Law Center, on the behalf of Debate and Discussion Society, I extend my big thanks to all of you, and I also extend my thanks to our Professor in charge, Professor Raman Mittal, for always guiding us, for always supporting us, and a big thanks to the students of this Debate and Discussion Society, to all the listeners, to all the viewers, and my special thanks to Vijay and Kajal for their immense contribution to making this event a successful event. So, sir, I'll request you to say a few words in this last session of Courtroom Legend.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for a remarkable elucidation of law on this ever-evolving and ever-important topic of freedom of speech and expression. We are indeed beholden to you for sparing time for us, for our students. We will always remember the words of wisdom, especially the last question I liked, which was asked by Vijay, as to your advice to the young students who are going to graduate within a few months. And I really liked your answer, sir. And your answer reverberates the answer which Gautam Buddha gave to his students, that apadipo bhav. Just start walking. Be a light unto yourself. Start walking. The path will be clear, right? Even if the path is not visible at a distance now, start walking. It is clear. You will see the path as you walk along. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much for your time, for sharing your views. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.